Hey folks, it's Kary Oberbrunner, and I have with me a fantastic guest today. I'm so excited. Let me quick give this setup. But first of all, Fuzz, welcome. Tell us your official name, and are you a doctor? And give us the full thing.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, by the way. And my name's Fazale Rana. I'm a biochemist by training. You can call me Fuzz. Everybody does. And I work for an organization called Reasons to Believe, which explores the interface between science and the Christian faith. So, as you know, as a biochemist, I've branched out into a lot of areas outside of biochemistry that, to me, have fascinating science faith implications.
Yes, yes. I want to give people the quick story because some people might not be of a faith background. And I just want you to know, if that's you, welcome, because we've had all kinds of people on this podcast, and you are welcome to join us. So don't turn it off. And here's why. What I appreciate about Fuzz is his books, Human 2.0. Is that your only book, or do you have multiple books?
Oh, I've written maybe 9 or 10 books over the
Perfect.
years. Yeah.
Okay. Give us what are some other topics that your
Yeah.
books are?
Well, as a biochemist, I'm very interested in questions relating to the origin of life and the design of biochemical systems. So I've
Yeah.
written 4 books in that particular category. Also, very interested in the question of human origins as well.
Yeah.
How
Okay.
do we make sense of kind of the biblical description of human origins and human nature in light of modern day anthropology? So I've done work in that area as well. So yeah,
I got a question about that at the end
sure.
from your book, because you mentioned, I think it was your book, you mentioned Neanderthals a lot.
Yeah,
And I want to talk about that
yeah,
because
sure.
we'll save that for the end though. But what I appreciate about Fuzz is that, folks, I've really been onboarding a lot of the authors, influencers, entrepreneurs who listen to this episode, this podcast. I've been onboarding them into Web3. And Web3 is essentially the new phase of the internet, the embodied internet, the immersive internet. And as a result, we're naturally seeing things like the metaverse, NFTs, crypto. One of the things that we've seen is transhumanism. And when I found Fuzz, I literally said, thank you, God, because before that I found some, I'm just going to say it, some lame Christians who I feel like they weren't being balanced. And maybe you can talk about this and just get started with the fact that, why do some Christians deny tech or are hypocritical towards tech? Why is that, first of all?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think part of it is the concern that Christians have that as human beings we may be playing outside of our lane.
Mm,
You oftentimes hear this question, should we play God? With the idea from a Christian perspective that no, we never want to play God. And I have a different take on that question. I think that because as human beings, according to the Christian worldview, we bear God's image, we're image bearers. And that means we reflect in some way features or aspects of our creator.
mm,
And if our creator is a is a creator, then we're going to create too. So, in other words, as Christians, or really as human beings, we can't help but to play God because we bear God's image. The concern becomes, are we trying to take God's place? And so that is the right question to ask, and it leaves a lot of space for science and technology. In fact, as a Christian, I see science and technology as an imperative of the faith. you know,
that's so
and
good.
uh, and so I think that's probably it's a genuine sense of humility,
Yeah.
but I think as you're pointing out, it's an unsophisticated view of science and technology.
I love that about your book, that you said that straight out. You're like, should we play God? Yes. According to Genesis 1, we're called to play God, but I know what you're saying. Imitate him as co-creators, not replace God. That's perfect. I love that. So other questions would be, we are putting in our ears technology, ear hearing aids. Now it's implants. You have a generation that's now becoming cyborgs. I mean, have you seen some of this crazy stuff?
Yeah, I have.
Okay. So that one guy who put an antenna in his head and it's like an implant. But where does it stop? I mean, we say, oh, the prosthetic limb with brain computer interface is okay if your leg gets chopped off. But pretty soon you see this line of, hey, if I can squat 600 pounds and sprint for 500 miles, why don't I just cut off my leg and put some of that? Like, where is the line?
That's a great question, because I think most people are fully comfortable with this type of technology for biomedical purposes to help people that are suffering from diseases or debilitating injuries. But there could very well be legitimate reasons why you would want to modify your biological makeup. Maybe, just a scenario off the top of my head. What if you are working in construction and it would help to wear an exoskeleton so that you could go in and maybe lift and move very heavy things and with greater precision? I could envision, those kinds of applications just as an example. And of course, having a brain computer interface implanted in your brain, giving you that seamless control of the exoskeleton where you even have a sense of ownership, where it feels like it's part of your body, could make perfect sense. And I don't see that as necessarily, compromising our identity or even our dignity as human beings. So there is a line, and I've been thinking about this for a number of years, and I still not quite sure where that line is.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's challenging about this. And people that, very good people with, the best of intentions who are actually pro-technology, could, very well draw that line in different places. Now, some people that are transhumanists think that we ought to use the technology to actually evolve ourselves,
Yes.
into post-humans.
Yes.
But as I've interacted with transhumanists who even hold to a materialistic worldview, some of them are very uncomfortable with that idea, where they do see limits, where they don't want to lose our identity as human beings. So it's messy. It's absolutely messy. But this is why I think, people really, from all worldviews, really need to understand the technology, understand the prospects of the technology, and really begin to engage in serious conversations about really what are the limits, and how do we, maybe enforce the limits,
Yeah. Well, this is why I loved your book, because I've read a lot on this topic now. You have Alcor out in Phoenix, who is basically cryopreservation your head. And there's a whole society that, I don't know if you feel this way, but the term singularity, where it's, the concept where artificial intelligence supersedes human intelligence. As I've read some of these books, they almost relate to this thing like the rapture.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's literally what I feel like. Their hope is in not a resurrection in the Christian sense. It's in the sense that we're going to upload our memories and brains into new vehicles of technology. Do you see that growing? I mean, I know it sounds sci-fi, but like the technology is catching up.
Yeah, I do. Well, and for example, on is it maybe Amazon Prime or Netflix? There's a program called Upload, which is essentially, envisioning that as being the afterlife, where your digital essence gets uploaded into this,
I didn't know that. I'm writing
computer
that down.
environment.
I'm writing that down.
I can't remember which
But Prime
streaming service
might be up. So it's called Up. Oh, are you talking about the show?
Yes, the show.
Yes, I heard about that.
Yeah, so it's exactly what you're describing.
Yes.
Right. And this, I mean, I personally am skeptical that we're ever going to be able to do that type of thing where we could create kind of a digital copy of ourselves. Now, but I know why people are becoming increasingly excited about it, because we're seeing some incredible progress being made in brain-computer interface technology, where people have done preliminary experiments showing that you can begin to tether brains together. This has been done in rats. It's fascinating work where you can have two rats that can see each other. One of them is trained to actually hit a lever to get a reward. The other one isn't trained in that way. And by tethering their brains together with these brain-computer interfaces, the rat that knows how to get the reward can actually somehow instruct or direct the rat that doesn't know how to get the reward to push the lever.
Oh my
And so there's the capacity to tether brains together, or at least that's what it appears. Some of these brain-computer interfaces are becoming very sophisticated.
Yeah.
Where machine learning algorithms can extract intent, user intent. And so, this is exciting stuff, to be certain.
Yes.
But, it's a type of stuff that I think leads us to think that maybe the singularity is actually achievable, but it's assuming a particular perspective on consciousness. It's a particular perspective on the brain and the mind, and it's just assuming that memory is like data that you would store on a hard drive, that memories are just videos playing in our minds. And I think people that have expertise in neuroscience, I unfortunately don't, would question whether those are actually useful models for thinking about the brain and the mind and consciousness and what memories are. But if you adopt that kind of hardware software model, then these types of advances really pave the way, I think, for really the hope that the singularity may be possible.
Well, and that is what is being proposed, meaning that our brains, our memories are what? Software, and we just need a new hardware, which is, i.e., a machine-based body. Is that kind of the concept?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I even saw recently a headline that said, one day Jimmy will meet his dead grandfather.
Yeah.
In other words, taking someone today who's alive, downloading all of their, while they're living, all of their quirks, their memories, their speech, and then someday when Jimmy is born, he could actually engage in the metaverse with his dead grandfather. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, this is bringing up, I think, one of the primary criticisms that I've seen leveled against kind of the transhumanist vision for salvation, and that is that what we end up saving isn't actually us. So if I'm somehow able to upload my mind and my memories into some kind of digital framework, what's existing now is a digital copy of myself that may attain a type of immortality. But when I die, I'm dead, right? And so that's the same concept, I think, about meeting your grandfather one day in the metaverse, is that you've created a digital replica, and I've seen people suggest that kind of thing with holograms, where you could, studying their behavior, the things that they've put on social media, the things they've written, anything that recordings you have, and kind of extract, with AI, their values, their mindset, and that you can have conversations with people as if they really still were around, and so you don't necessarily lose that wisdom or what have you. But again, you're not really having a true conversation with that person. It's a replica, right?
Interesting.
That's very, this is called the salvation paradox by philosophers of technology.
So basically, your take is that Scripture talks about to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord for those believers. So you believe that a soul, even if the quote physical body and even the mental can be salvaged, the soul has an account and that can't skirt around that judgment.
Yes, that's exactly right. So my particular worldview would see, again, that the fact that there is an immaterial aspect of our nature, we could call it the soul, that does interface with our brains. So I think the mind is actually immaterial, and that it is, immortal in that sense.
Wow.
That it would exist beyond our physical body. But part of Christian theology too is that one day that there will be resurrected bodies that we'll have, where that soul will then be ensouled again within a physical body. I mean, in some respects, that vision for the future that Christians hope in is a type of transhumanism, where
Yeah.
this body that is full of limitations will be replaced by a resurrection body.
Yeah.
That won't suffer thusly. So
I love that. I love that. And your book's so fascinating because it gives, in my opinion, there's two extremes with transhumanism. One is let's deny faith, let's deny God, let's deny spirit, and let's just go with science. And unfortunately, there's a lot of Christians who do the opposite, where it's, hey, let's just, study the spirit only. And yet the hypocrisy that I was mentioning was, yet they'll still use pacemakers, they'll still use prosthetics, they'll still use medicine, they'll still use all this other tech, but they'll somehow deny that they value it. Do you think that this comes down, Fuzz, to motivation and hope? Like, what are we placing our hope in?
Yeah, that's really an insightful question on your part, and I had not thought of it in those terms. What is creating that dichotomy? But I think motivation very well may be the ultimate factor. That is, as Christians, they see the motivation of transhumanism as, essentially trying to come up with an alternative gospel that is, looking to science and technology to save us. And I think probably transhumanists that at least hold to a materialistic worldview. There's some that actually don't, some that actually are theists. Believe it or not, transhumanism isn't a monotheistic a monolithic mindset by any means. There's a range of views among transhumanists, but they probably look at Christians and see that the motivation is simply wishing, based on faith, for some kind of salvation that they question will ever come. And so I think motivation may be actually what creates the odds, which is, to me, an interesting insight. But one of the things that I try to point out in Humans 2.0 is the idea that there are a lot of bridge points between Christianity and transhumanism. I mean, both recognize that the world that we live in isn't the way it's supposed to be, that there is human pain and suffering, and that we want to do what we can to mitigate pain and suffering. And both Christians and non-believers alike, particularly those that hold to a transhumanist vision, see science and technology as useful towards mitigating pain and suffering. We want to see human beings flourish. We want to see a world where there's justice, right? We see death as unnatural. There's a sense that there's a purpose and a destiny for each individual and for the human species that is somehow, it's tragic when that individual's life comes to an end, because that purpose and that destiny seems to be lost. And so those are shared, ideals that Christians and transhumanists have. The big difference really is, where do we find our source for salvation? Is it in the person of Christ, or is it in science and technology? And so, when we realize that, it helps me to look at transhumanists as really not people to be afraid of as a Christian, but really people that I want to get to know, because there's ways that we could work together to bring in a powerful and promising future. But at the same time, there's just a lot of ethical issues connected with this technology, and And I don't think a materialistic worldview is well equipped to handle those ethical issues in the way that the Christian worldview can.
Yeah. First century Gnosticism. Is this just a new flavor where material is essentially bad, so let's do whatever we want, let's trash it? We need to evolve into another higher level. Do you think this is a new flavor of Gnosticism? What do you think?
Yeah, that's again a very interesting insight because in many respects, many transhumanists would hold to an evolutionary origin to humanity. They were the product of evolution. And as a result of that, they don't really see anything fundamentally sacred about the human body.
Yeah.
It's the product of evolution. It's riddled with flaws that are a vestige of our evolutionary history. So we can step in and correct those flaws and mitigate pain and suffering. We're on this evolutionary way station right now in terms of our present form. Many transhumanists would argue we're going to continue to evolve. So why not take control of our own evolution and really produce human beings that would be ideally suited to live in a technologically oriented future?
Yeah.
And so I guess it is a type of Gnosticism where there's nothing sacred about the human body. And from a Christian perspective, I think there is this sense that the whole individual as a human being is indeed sacred, that we don't view ourselves as ghosts in the machine, but that there is this integration of our immaterial material aspect, both of which are sacred. And so that would be a place of strong divergence. And so, many of the ethical issues that Christians would see with, transhumanism, or at least the transhumanist vision, would be, in a sense, a loss of human dignity and human value, or that loss of, or the exploitation of human beings in the process of creating a transhumanist future. I don't think transhumanists would be in favor of exploiting human beings, but unfortunately, much of this technology is very, very easily lends itself towards that end.
Yeah. Well, even the Apostle Paul talking about how our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, there's a sacredness to the material in Scripture that you don't really find in a extreme transhumanist, where it's kind of like, all right, this part's no longer really needed. I can upgrade this, I can upgrade that. And I think the question then is, where do we lose our humanity with the transhumanism? Where is that line where you've gone too far? Is it your body's 51% machine? You know what I'm saying? I mean, this is becoming very, very real, very fast.
It is, and it's not easy. And
No.
I think probably both you and I would intuitively look at certain modifications and say we really are uncomfortable with that.
Yeah.
But it's hard to, at this point in time, to articulate why that seems to be,
right. Well, I mean, you're speaking to a former pastor here. I mean, for years we've had, not to get into graphic stuff, but you've had certain women augmenting their bodies, and think about that, even the term augmented, and we have augmented reality now, right? We have virtual reality. But you get to this point where, where is it okay for one person, or medically speaking, but then, the enhancement part of it, would I like to run, 50 miles an hour for 100 miles straight? Probably. I think what's fringe today is going to be mainstream tomorrow.
Yeah.
And this is where that cyborg concept, I got my next book coming out with blockchain, but I want to show you a chart right here because your book fits front and center with this. Let me show this to you here. If people are podcast listeners, they'll have to, Chrome has lost permission to capture your screen. Interesting. All right, can do it now. But here's what I basically say on this chart. I basically say that transhumanism is an extreme version of Web3. Web3, this is where I love to reside. Fuzz is the fact that 5G and AR and VR and metaverse and crypto, it's all converging, in my opinion, to create something very unique and scary and good, a new reality. But then I believe that some people within this new space are seeing it as transhumanism as the ultimate. I mean, you remember The Matrix, right? In fact, your book, you talk a lot about what is
Iron Man.
Iron Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was awesome, man. Folks, you got to get his book. I'm telling you, the audio version just came out. The book came out in 2019.
Yes.
But I listened to it, and I listened to other things that are current. I don't know how they did it, but it's so current. But why did you bring in Iron Man a lot?
Well, one is I'm kind of a comic book nerd. So
yeah, I could tell you were weaving it in. I'm a Matrix nerd, so yeah.
and to me, Iron Man is kind of the quintessential, transhumanist superhero, because Tony Stark's real superpower is his genius, and so he builds this armor that helps him to transcend his biological limits. And as you look at the Iron Man story arcs over the years, increasingly he's integrating that armor into his biological makeup. It goes from just simply wearing the armor to really integrating that armor, in him. And in fact, in a fairly recent story arc, Tony Stark ends up uploading his digital essence, if you will, into kind of a main into a computer system, and so he's now functioning like an AI. And so there's a lot of themes that deal with our relationship between science and our relationship as human beings with technology, and what are the limits of modifications, and when does Tony Stark end and Iron Man begin? And so, great philosophy of technology in the Iron Man comics, which really is relevant to what we're talking about here, of course.
Oh yeah. So here's a question. I want to talk about reasons to believe. That's the organization you're part of, correct?
Yes, that's right.
So did they publish the book?
Yes, this is we have a publishing arm at Reasons to Believe called RTB Press.
Okay.
And so we will typically publish approximately 3 books a year.
Okay.
That are written by people that are part of the RTB team.
Yeah.
One of our visions is actually to spin RTB Press off as its own publishing arm, as its own independent publisher.
Yeah.
That would focus on publishing, science, faith type of works.
Let's talk about that offline because we can do that. One thought I had, here's a little tip. Take it back to your people. Your book, I think, has the legs and the prophetic nature and the relevance to go major mainstream. I really believe that. And here's the one tweak that I think it needs to make it happen. Could you know how in the book you mentioned multiple times, if this is too in-depth, go ahead and skip to X part. My thought, because I'm even a pretty technical guy, but you got into some crazy deep stuff with the how-to. I wonder if you could extract the main part there. And I know it would mess up the Iron Man narrative, but I just feel like there's so many people that would dive into that mini book concept that would otherwise get lost with some of the other bookend of the, so just think about that, because we've seen this, I work with Dan Sullivan, strategic coach, and he takes some of his books and makes them mini books, and they're just digestible in a much easier way. But man, I thought that one part of it, every person alive needs to read that part, because it's coming. I mean, you go to the headlines right now and you see Metaverse, Oculus, Activision. I mean, we're literally seeing this book come alive with headlines. Elon Musk, Neuralink,
Yeah.
right? I mean, all that
Yeah.
stuff.
Well, and Elon Musk is a fascinating person to me in many, many ways. But, part of his motivation for Neuralink and in creating, brain-computer interfaces, and my understanding is that what he's done actually has propelled the technology forward in significant ways. That he's made some very significant improvements in the technology. But his primary motivation is concern that in short order, AI is going to be,
Take over, yeah.
far surpass our capabilities as humans. And unless we actually interface our brains
Yeah.
with computer systems, we're not going to be able to compete. So he's maybe a reluctant transhumanist, or I don't know, or maybe he's embracing transhumanism, with great vigor. But either way, he almost sees this as transhumanism as necessary because of the coming AI threat. So
in other words, if we don't integrate with machines soon, then we'll run two separate tracks, and that track will experience the singularity. And like the analogy is, hey AI, you give AI a command that says, hey AI, make the world more efficient, and it takes that command and says, I'll eliminate all humans.
yeah,
Because humans, like, in other words, it can't feel the
right,
command, it just executes the command.
yeah.
Wow.
Well, and there is an irony too, because to really have brain-computer interfaces that can be used in a sophisticated way that Elon Musk envisions, you have to actually have AI technology to extract the user intent. The electrical activity in the brain becomes so complex that unless you have some kind of machine learning algorithm to correlate that activity with different and subtle intents on the part of the user, you can't really get it to work. It's one thing to be able to teach somebody to control the movement of a robotic limb. It's another thing, to have sophisticated intentions communicated to, electronic devices, to computer systems.
Yes.
And so he's relying on AI to save us from AI.
Interesting. So as we conclude here, as we wrap this up, what's your vision? Because, for the person who's just listening, didn't you come from a Muslim background?
Yeah, I did. And by the time I went to college, I pretty much had given up on Islam and settled into a position of agnosticism. But it was really the elegant designs of biochemical systems that I, was learning about as a graduate student that really helped me to rediscover the Creator and set me on a trajectory that led to my conversion to Christianity. So, to me, I think science and faith really fit well together in many, many different ways.
Yeah.
That science provides us with reasons to, for our faith. Science is a wonderful outlet for a person of faith to serve the world and to fulfill the Christian mission. And, I think science and technology is something that helps us ultimately as Christians to live out the kingdom of God principles in a way that we can mitigate suffering in the world, promote flourishing. So we shouldn't, as Christians, we shouldn't be afraid of science and technology. And for scientists and technologists, they shouldn't be afraid of Christianity either. Right? It goes both ways.
Do you think an ultimate transhumanist could view one day having a faith or being a Christian is a inferior evolutionary gene, and therefore it needs to be eliminated?
That's an interesting question, and I could easily see that school of thought emerging.
Yeah.
Particularly if faith positions actually stand in the way of uncontrolled advance in technology and
There you go.
and the transhumanist vision. There's I don't know that I would necessarily recommend it if somebody is from a Christian worldview, because there's it's quite graphic, but it was Altered Carbon, 2 seasons on Netflix. And again, it just shows this dystopian type of future that arises out of kind of the transhumanist vision.
So it's called
Altered Carbon.
Carbon. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
See, it's interesting you mentioned that, because you have the show Upload that I've heard about, which I hear is more even comedy. Like there's a comedic point.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then one of my friends was telling me, I haven't seen this one yet, but Black Mirror back in 2012-ish. But you see all of our media going this way as well.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing that's interesting to me, is that because transhumanism has really been the fuel for science fiction, and now it's fiction becoming reality in front of our eyes. There's 2 things that happen. One is that we've already thought through a little bit about what technology can and can't do for us, and the dangers of technology, and the concern of a dystopian future. So that actually helps, I think, prepare our culture at large to maybe engage transhumanism with a bit of hesitancy and appropriate skepticism. But on the other hand, because we've been so inculcated with this type of science fiction, that some of the ideas of transhumanism that should to us cause us to raise our eyebrows don't, because
we've adopted it.
Yeah, we've become immune to it because of that exposure. Yeah. So but it's interesting to see science fiction becoming science reality in some remarkable ways. But in Altered Carbon, there is a group of people who refuse to actually attain digital immortality, and they're religious people that, hey, when we die, we die. And it creates actually quite a bit of conflict within the society. Wow. Because of the religious people who are viewed as being, Luddites and kind of, backward type of people that are standing in the way of progress. And so I could easily see that kind of vision. So for me, this is why it's very important for Christians to actually become sophisticated in our understanding of the technology, to recognize the value and the power of the technology, how it can be used for good, and be willing to actually be people that are pioneering this technology as well, but also represent that voice, of reason, if you will, or that faith voice that, suggest reasonable limits, to the technology.
This is so good, folks. Get Human 2.0 today. I'm telling you, it is one of the most important books. It's my favorite of 2022. I read a lot of books. And Fuz, thank you so much. Where can people find out more about you personally and Reasons to Believe?
Yeah, the easiest thing to do would just be to go to our website, reasons.org, and check out, there's information about our organization, all types of science faith resources that people can access. So that would be the easiest thing to do.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here today. And I'll stick on with you and share a few things. Thanks, Fuz.
Thanks.